At the beginning of the new school term in September, we were treated to the unedifying spectacle of police turning up to intervene between a protest of 50 parents and a school, as many children had been turned away on the first day of school for not wearing the correct uniform. So what we want to examine in this session, what is going on here? There seems to be a febrile relationship now between schools and parents and the exercise of rules. So I've got three great speakers to speak on this, and then we'll go back over to the audience. They'll speak for 6 to 7 minutes. On my left, is it my left? Great schooling I had. This is Maisie Rowe. Well, Maisie is a landscape architect. She's the artistic director of the Battle of Ideas, but for this session, her particular experience has been, she's been quoted in the Daily Mail in relationship to a campaign she was involved with against regulations that were introduced into her children's primary school. So that's where she's coming from. Then to my far right, Karen Wilkinson, who's the founder and director of the Parents Union. She's actively campaigned against the 2013 regulations about restricting parents being asked to sensibly make decisions about taking their children out at school. And if people remember that case when went to the High Court and a man who'd taken his children out quite sensibly in school time, Karen was very much involved in that case. And last we have Neil Davenport, and he's a sixth form teacher, so he's got experience on the chalk edge face. He's a journalist as well, and he particularly, people who read Spiked Online will have seen his articles between the intersection of public and private life. So Neil's particularly investigated and interested in that subject, and I think we're hoping that may be what part of this discussion will be about today. Amazing.
Thank you, Jane. Well, what Jane didn't say is I'm a mum of two 9-year-olds, yes, and because I'm a mum, I'm going to tell you a story. So this story began in this time last year when we returned from the summer holidays. We had just, our little school had just become Ofsted Outstanding, and we also had a new leadership team. That means a new head teacher and deputy in place. And we came back to school, and we suddenly found out that all children in our school, walking at all times, had to walk with their hands held behind their backs. So I'll actually show you what this sort of looks like. Just imagine I'm a 5-year-old, and we have to walk like this. So this apparently is called the University Walk. Now, I imagine some of you here have been to university, and I wonder if anyone's ever seen anyone in a university walk, or whether the ability to walk in such a manner contributed to your achievement of a university place. Angela Abrahams, our head teacher, said, "Our recently introduced university walk inspires children to be the best they can and to go shine in the world. It was introduced to strengthen pupil safety, further raise the aspirations of pupils, and to maximise learning time." And our chair of governors wrote to me, said, "The new policy was introduced because, sadly, last term, discipline and behaviour had slipped considerably. Behaviour in the corridors was becoming problematic, and children were arriving in class with a heightened sense of excitement. This inevitably wasted a significant amount of time. The pressure of the national curriculum means that no time can be lost if the school is to maintain its outstanding status, enabling the children to achieve at the highest level." Well, I don't know about you, but I think children arriving in the classroom in a state of excitement isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there you go. Our school did have an ethos. It was a really happy, loving school. It struck a very good balance between humour and discipline. It was said in our Ofsted, it's a school that's not afraid to love. There was a lovely sort of balance as well of informality and formality, and this rather catchy, rather daft motto, "Go shine in the world." But all of that was sort of really left aside, because the priority, according to the chair of governors, was to hold on to our Ofsted Outstanding at all costs. So there was a reputation watching, there was a holding on to something, not really putting the child or education or anything else at the centre of your community school. What really matters is what the government thinks of your school, and that's overrules everything. The school handled this really strangely, contrary actually to what Jane said. There was no campaign. The school simply refused to meet parents other than in one-to-one. I had a particular meeting myself after 2 days back from the term in which the head teacher told me her life story and told me not to tell any other parents this life story because I was the recipient of her confidences. And that was very, very odd, picking you off one by one. And then it got really kind of underhand, and we were also treated really very contemptibly. It revealed to me a profound disconnect between the governors and the governed, in effect an erosion of connection between the people that ran the school and the people who used the school. The chair of governors made a public statement that said, parents that question this rule are not acting in the best interest of their child. I'd like to know who thought he was acting in the best interest of my child. It was a very, very arrogant thing to say. And the parent governor, on one hand, rightly said it's not for parents to dictate how the school is run. I would contend that we weren't really trying to dictate how the school was run, we just didn't like this rule. And she said, I think you'll find I'm a representative, not a delegate. This is deep political theory. I'm required to take no account of your opinion. And that's the end of the phone call. As I said, there was no campaign. It was just a few weeks later, the whole thing took a really bizarre twist because everyone in the area was really basically wetting themselves at the ridiculousness of this rule. And someone sent it to the Camden New Journal, from where it was picked up by the Nationals, the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Daily Mail. ITN News was outside the school gates, and Mumsnet had a thread, am I being unreasonable to think that this head teacher has lost the plot? To which 1,000 people wrote, about as unanimously as Mumsnet gets, it's famous as a nest of vipers, everyone said, yes, she has. So it got really out of hand. It was very divisive. On the school level, there was lots of backbiting, people crying. I got accused of exercising white privilege by not wanting my children to walk in such a manner, which was very bizarre, very sort of convoluted thing. There was clearly a sort of class dimension. Oh, you middle-class mums, you don't think your children need to behave properly. Your children will succeed anyway. And so that was the strange one. And it was just a massive fiasco. The school was really divided, and honestly, it's not recovered. This is not a happy story. Okay, I'll save some of these points, I guess, for the following discussion. I think it's really worth asking what's new about this, and to ask why such matters that are really quite trivial matters of school running should become matters for intense public and media attention. Do we have a crisis of authority in our schools? That schools are grabbing for rather bizarre methods of getting authority at a time when the status of teachers has eroded in recent years. Not so long ago, teachers were on a par with doctors and lawyers, and only in the Beano were teachers and parents figures of ridicule. And that was funny because they were so respected. So if you then put a tin tack on their chair, that was side-splitting. Whereas now, to take the mickey out of teachers, you don't see stand-up comics rushing to ridicule teachers. And I think we might talk about the tensions between public and private behaviour, this idea that children don't know how to behave anymore and that parents don't either. And then just the sort of random absurdity of such a thing where you can upturn your received notions of how things might be done, and leading into very odd places, as this did in this case. Thank you.
Thanks, Maisie. Karen.
Human beings and society are very complex things, and we get by through a sort of an arrangement of everything from expectation to codes of conduct to pressures to conform to rules to regulations to laws, and how we negotiate and navigate through life and all of those things depends on our ability to understand which rules are worth following, which ones need changing. When we start off with life, we give children one very simple rule to start off with, which is do what you're told, and then part of their education is then unravelling that so that they decide when it is that they take action and why they're taking that action. So part of school, I think, is about learning when to break the rules, when to bend them, as well as when to follow them. And a classic example is I have a 12-year-old son who, when in year 6, came back, and he's one of those kids that tells me everything that goes on in school. And he said, the head teacher in assembly today said it's very important that we think very carefully when an adult tells us to do something, and we have to think for ourselves, is that the right thing to do? And I thought, well, that's very sensible. And he said, yes, and he gave this deep sigh and said, then she told us that we all had to stand up, be quiet, and walk to our classrooms in a line. I thought, job done. Here's a boy who's already questioning the rules. But now we've got to a situation where school rules aren't just being applied to children in schools, they're being applied to adults outside the school. So that which brings me to the term time attendance regulations. For those who don't know, in 2013, the head teacher's discretion was changed from allowing up to 10 days absence in special circumstances with additional discretion. In exceptional circumstances, law came in, you have to change, you can only allow 10 days absence in exceptional circumstances, and family holiday was removed from the special, from the category. Frankly, it's a really stupid rule. It's a result of prejudice, ignorance, and intellectual sloppiness. If I go through those in order, the prejudice being that Michael Gove decided that the Tottenham riots were due to an educational underclass. He then asked an old Etonian contemporary of David Cameron, who is his special advisor on behaviour and education, who was an award-winning ex-head teacher, called Charlie Taylor, to do a report into attendance and behaviour. And that report, my mother's an education welfare officer, so everything that I say about this has been checked by an EWA. But she said, she read the report, it makes sense, but I could have written it in half an afternoon. Mr. Taylor went out and spoke to some schools and some professionals. He failed to talk to any parents. And he came up with a phrase which was, some head teachers and parents think there is an automatic entitlement to 10 days absence. Now, if he had bothered to talk to parents, if he had bothered to do any further research, he would have found out that actually, because he then drew a conclusion that if a child misses 10 days holiday every year of their school life, they'll have missed out on a year's worth of education by the end. But actually, the Department for Education statistics show that in 2011, that actually only applied to 5 children in the country, and in 2012 it was only 3 children who had 2 weeks off every year of their school lives. So there wasn't really much of an issue to tackle here, and only 7% of school absence was due to family holidays, and less than 0.1% of school sessions were being missed. There was also, I think, a real intellectual sloppiness about understanding the statistics. So the Department for Education has now for some time, even in the Labour government, been drawing massive conclusions from some statistical data which says that there is a correlation between attendance and attainment, that holy grail. And what they have failed to understand, and I ran all these statistics the minute I got them in 2012 past an actuary, is that a correlation is not the same as a causation. And actually the statistics say nothing whatsoever about the causation. You could equally argue not that turning up at school increases attainment, but that children who have low attainment are less likely to go to school. But no one's bothered to drill in and to find out what the factors are at play, because actually child's attainment is this is a whole myriad of factors which come into play, and 80% of which are due to parental background and not to the school. So when I've been going, campaigning on this issue, and we've had 3 debates so far in Parliament, we've had endless petitions signed by hundreds of thousands of parents, and we have had court cases, because we've got now 80,000 parents plus have been fined on this. We've had people getting criminal records, because this thing about not bothering to ask why parents take their children out on holiday is really showing through. People take children out of school for a range of reasons that get categorised as family holiday. Yes, sometimes it's because holidays are cheaper, but often it's because actually the parents have no choice about when to take their holiday. And that accounts for the police, paramedics, bus services and so on. There's also a lot there around certain industries such as farming and such as the tourism industry. So it's regularly thrown at me, there are some schools where half the school's missing. well, did anyone ask? And I was told this by a government minister. I said to him, well, where are these schools? Oh, they're in Cornwall. So has anyone asked why the children are out? It's because their parents only make money during the term time, during the holiday season. That's when they need to work. They can't possibly go on holiday then. And actually, Devon and Cornwall tourism industry reported a loss of £87 million 1 year because of the Gove effect. But this understanding that children aren't just in the school place, but they are part of a wider community, they are part of a wider society, seems to have missed them by. I would say in all of the work that we've done, it's become clear that we have a two-sided triangle in education. We have government policy making on one side and the education profession on the other side. And the relationship between those two is not functioning well. And we need another body, which is for parents and for pupils, the users of the education service, to be ensuring that the best in education policy and practice is being implemented by government. Thank you.
Neil.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I have a lot of sympathy with many of the key points that Kate has just outlined, and in my introduction I was going to sort of touch on kind of a few things. And it is a sorry state of affairs, isn't it? It's quite a grim relationship at the moment in terms of parents and schools in England, and I think the way that the situation is evolving at the moment, it doesn't do parents any favours, it doesn't do schools or kids any favours either. I think the main destructive drive at the moment has been the way in which successive elective governments have constantly used status schooling as a form of control over parents, and in particular what's called troubled families. We have seen this via the draconian enforcement of children's attendance at school. Parents can be fined for what's called an unauthorised absence. There's the issue of term time holidays, which Kate has outlined. But from a teacher's point of view, and from somebody who works in a state school, from our perspective, we are under tremendous pressure to enforce this. I can't think of any teacher who actually enjoys having to do this and to sort of follow this through. And it's not something that teachers necessarily have an option on. For schools, the consequences of not monitoring attendance data can lead to a school being downgraded to requires improvement. And that used to be, the old satisfactory, and local education authorities would leave you alone. If you get a requires improvement, it means that you've got Ofsted on your back all the time. You've got constant monitoring by local education authorities. The school I teach at, we have this, I think, insane situation where we get 20-odd kids going to Oxford and Cambridge. Extremely good A-level results, but we are requires improvement because of the issue of data and the issue of monitoring parents. Completely insane. If Ofsted are about raising the attainment of kids' exam results and education, I think we do a pretty good job of that. But what we're not doing is monitoring what parents are doing, and I think it's entirely destructive. So I think the culture of keeping tabs on children and parents is driven by high office. It's not driven by officious teachers. And don't forget, Michael Gove, when he was Education Secretary, did make the point he would like to do away with biological parents' rights. He would like to do away with that. And I think that did inform some of his measures when he was Education Secretary. So I think in this instance, parents should seek to challenge in exactly the way that's been articulated so far on this particular ruling, because it does interfere in family life and the biological rights of parents to quite an unprecedented degree. On the softer end of the scale, but no less aggravating, I don't think, we have schools, head teachers sending letters home to parents, complaining about what they put in a child's lunchbox, whether it contravenes a petty, healthy eating policy that a school has sort of dreamt up. And again, I don't think schools should undermine what a parent chooses to feed their child. And I think parents are right to feel outraged whenever these incursions on family life occur. So that's where my sympathies lie, actually, with parents. However, on the other side, I think when it comes to specific rules in a school, it could be dress codes, it could be policies on detention, it could be mobile phone policies. I think it's reasonable for school to, enforce those expectations. And controversially, and I think it'd be interesting to see what people think of this, I think it's reasonable to demand certain expectations from parents on a school premises. I think a school institution is still a formal space, and there's expectations of formality in that formal space, I think, are acceptable in the same way they are in other public spaces. I think schools are not in any kind of different in that way. So I think the blurring between private family life and public space is what's sort of driving this sort of unfortunate turn of events. So as I was saying before, with schools trying to enforce and encroach too much on family life, then you have parents objecting to, a dress code policy on a school trip, or a predicted grade on the UCAS application form. Now, there's nothing wrong with negotiating specific issues within schools, and I think increasingly schools are better at being aware of specific needs of a child. It could be a medical condition, which means that certain rules will be adjusted accordingly. But nevertheless, I think a key role of secondary school education in particular is passing on the values of universalism, a key cornerstone of modern society, against the particularism found within the family. I think getting children to learn about a public civic space has norms and rules applicable to everyone, I think is an important transitional bridge between the individual, the family, and the wider society, and a demand that the particular values of one family be allowed to supersede the standard universal values of what a school is attempting to put forward is an attempt to destroy that distinction between the public and private life, and I would argue thus erode civilised values. And I think when parents are sort of championing that demand that a basic rule be changed, I think it can also have the impact whereby children learn to view adult authority with complete contempt. Now, again, I think a lot of this is driven from on high. Parents are in a state of constant anxiety because they are told that creating a child-centred family in a society obsessed with a child's well-being is a good marker of parenting. I think the more that officialdom creates intense panics around a child's well-being, the more that parents do become overprotective of their child and suspicious about a teacher's motivations. And unfortunately, it goes the other way. As teachers, we are constantly encouraged by Ofsted and local education authority to view parents with increased suspicion and not to trust their judgments either. So on balance, though, I think some schools' obsessions with uniform, punctuality and other rules can often be at the expense of the value of teaching and learning in the classroom. I think many schools tend to operate a caricature of discipline and formality, because I think for true formality to operate naturally, there has to be something of serious value that would create an automatic reverence to that institution, and I don't think that can be artificially informed. I think as the passing on of knowledge has become secondary to various social engineering policies, and I think as subject knowledge is now considered less important in a teacher than classroom strategies, I think it's no surprise that it's hard to create a genuine formal atmosphere in a school. Too often, the petty rules that people have been talking about is an attempt to combat this lack of authority once the authority of knowledge has been eroded. And I think schools end up trying too hard and it backfires. What I want to finish on is that what I think we need is not parents and teachers working together in partnership, to coin a horribly technocratic Ofsted phrase, but a sort of basic adult solidarity within a school community. I think the vast majority of teachers and parents have a common interest in wanting the best for the children in their care, and I think this would be best achieved if the government didn't demand that schools interfere in the family or to cajole parents into interfering into sort of basic school rules.
I'd like to hear what you think.
I was going to say I've had similar experiences. I'm currently doing my GCSEs, which are now much harder, obviously, with the new 1 to 9 papers and other things. And I woke up in the morning and I didn't put on black socks because apparently we have to have black socks. I wore Superman socks. And then, yeah, I know. And then a teacher somehow, I don't know how, out of the corner of their eye, Yeah, I'm just, my life's failed now. I wore Superman socks one day. What's going to happen to me? And then apparently it was so despicable that I had to be sent to a shadow structure, which is basically we had to stay in for break 2 and we had to talk about why what we did was wrong. So instead of revising in break 2 or doing my homework or doing other things that I had to do at the time, talking with my friends, socializing, looking at work, I had to sit down, do nothing, and then I was given a sheet to write about what I've done wrong. I knew what I did wrong, it was against the rule, but then you had to say why. There was one question that really angered me about how this could affect other students, and then I asked, what would wearing Superman socks do? And he said, and I already knew that he was going to make me write something absurd, and I wrote it, and it was right. And what the thing was it's going to inspire rebellious behavior in other students. So I don't really understand the rule there, but I just wanted to bring that up, and I just wanted to ask if anyone that's talking could bring up not just rules to do with behavior, but rules to do with how the choice that schools can choose what subjects they do. Like some schools do RE just for one term and they swap it around, things like that. I don't think schools should be able to do that, especially with RE, which is the most successful subject in GCSEs. I don't know why schools are just thinking of doing something like that. And how schools have approaches to the arts and how the government's considering taking away the arts. I just wanted people to bring that up because I have a real passion for the arts. So yeah, right. I'll gladly debate anyone about the arts.
I happen to work in a school where there are strict rules about socks and that type of thing. I've only recently joined, and it has been quite interesting having gone from a school which is slightly more liberal on those type of situations. Essentially, my point was going to be about culture rather than behaviour. And there is an obsession in schools about the behaviour and enforcing very strict rules, but when there's no focus on culture and what the culture we want to engender in young people is and the identity of our schools and how we cooperate with young people in order to try and get the best out of them, rather than to see them in another situation where there's an enforcement of rules. There isn't a great sense of belonging, togetherness, I feel, in schools. They're becoming far too corporate as a result of the perception of the way that the government wants us to act. So my main focus really is to try and draw it, the culture of schools rather than the obsession with behaviour and rigorous enforcement of very, very strict procedures.
Okay.
Just a quick one on holidays, actually, because a couple of things I think. I don't think holidays are educational in the way that I understand what education is for, school education. I don't think kids learn lessons in when they're on a family holiday. I think that has massive values to the family. Holidays are great, we all learn lots, but I don't think it's the same as formal education. I also don't think it's necessarily the right of families to have holidays. I find that quite an odd thing, to think that it's okay to just sort of be demanding that families should be able to take holidays outside of the school holidays. And what I would like from schools, actually, is for teachers to argue why it's important for the kids to be in school in term time and not on holiday, because that they're learning, they're learning subjects, they're getting a good education, and that actually they will be losing out if they're not there. And I think, Neil, you talked about adult solidarity, and I think that would be something that I would like to come together with teachers around, to actually to share those high expectations that we have of kids and that we have of schools, and for the teachers to argue why where the value is, and that actually being in school is incredibly valuable.
Just to respond to that point, if we're going to take that tack, I would say that therefore school holidays in fact should be sacrosanct, and I would not expect, as has happened this week, my 15-year-old daughter to come back from school on the last day with an entire raft of homework that she's been told she needs to have done in the holidays. These are our family times, so if you want it one way, you keep it one way and both ways.
And that's the gentleman down here.
Schools and the public school system is basically discrediting itself, precisely for the sort of comments that I just heard from the front left there. My own experience is looking after an 8-year-old boy whose school faced closure. We live in an 11-pass area, and therefore it mattered to us that he goes into a good primary school, and through an unexpected departure of one child, we got the opportunity to put him up for interview in actually the best school in the district. Lovely little village school on the tops above where I live. And we also had a family trip planned to go to Tanzania as a result of work that wasn't stuff that I could move. It was me piggybacking a trip for the children to go and see a country the way we see proper wild animals and poverty and success and growth and urbanism. You can imagine the sort of things that they saw for the first time in a country as both hopeful and as depressed and as wild as Tanzania. He was offered the place conditional upon a 1st September start, which of course we couldn't do because it clashed with the trip that had already been booked. And as a result of that, scales started to fall from our eyes. We just decided, well, you know, isn't this just a little bit mad that he can't spend 2 weeks of the 3 in a foreign country that is going to be as impressive, as educational as Tanzania, because he has to go and learn reading? Isn't this just a bit mad? And then you start thinking, well, actually, there are an awful lot of other things about school and the way that primary school children are taught that's a bit mad. And the front has already alluded to quite a few of them. The one that I think is particularly bonkers, talking about children out of school walking around, is how many of them now seem to be wearing high-vis jackets, like they're dustmen or construction workers. And the strange feeling of paranoia it must give the children themselves that they're not competent to walk the streets unless they're high-vis dressed. This is immensely disempowering stuff that we are doing to our children. And therefore, Jennifer and I just simply rebelled. We took the kid out. He's now home educated. We're part of the fastest growing educational sector in this country.
Is there an idea that parents don't seem to feel they should make choices now? A lot of it does seem to be, I want to do this. Schools are relatively, they're institutions. They are relatively unbending. It's like one size fits all. And is this where the tension is coming? People do have to make choices and decide what are their priorities. Karen, I'll start.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we need to make very clear is that parents are not saying that we think it should be willy-nilly, that children should be out of school just for the sake of a family holiday willy-nilly. I think all we're asking for is a return to the previous situation where head teachers had their own discretion and could rely on their own discretion. But I think that the idea that the only place that learning happens is in school, I think is very wrong. I mean, I first came to this because I grew up in Kenya. I had an opportunity to take my children out for 3 weeks, 2 weeks of which were in the school term. They were in 3 different years, one of them in SATS year. This was January. So I'd said to all the teachers, look, I'm sorry, I'm doing this. This is before the new regulations came in. I am going to do this. It's very important to me and to my children. And so, please give me all the work. Let me know what it is that we need to cover. I don't want to put you out when they get back, etc. And without exception, all 3 teachers said to me, no, they will get a tremendous experience when they're out there. Don't worry about school. We teach them all for everything 3 times. We'll make sure that they understand. Go, have a fabulous time. And what I couldn't understand is why the next year, suddenly that was not the situation at all. Suddenly I would be a criminal if I were to do that. And so I think the other thing that I've come across since doing this is that there are 7 million people in the UK who can't afford a week's holiday and 5 million who can't afford a day out. And the charities that are working, 600 charities, a day out, did I say? The 600 charities that are working to give those children an experience outside the 6 streets that they grow up in report tremendous things. Children who are saying, why don't we have stars where I come from? Because they've never seen stars before. Children who live in Bristol who've never been to the sea. We mustn't underestimate the educational advantages of actually moving from one place to another. And if that happens to be a week in a caravan on a sun holiday because it's £9 and that's what people can afford, then I, for one, am not going to stop that parent from taking their children out of school.
Amazing. That's amazing.
I think the Batman socks guy raised a... Superman. I'm so sorry. Superman socks guy raised a very good point. I think the problem with this discussion is it's incredibly narrow focus, actually. So what I realised when I actually looked at what a school governor does, and because I was like, I want to make a PTA and so we can debate this kind of stuff. Really, this hands behind the back or this uniform, it's a very narrow focus and very different to... Well, you're talking about educational policy. When is RE taught? And there's a whole load of what schools do, way more. And I think it's almost like a distraction that parents are so get the intersection of the home life and the school life, which is uniform, food, and detention if they're kept late, takes up so much space. But what really about the educational policy? And I mean, I know I've come to a public forum to complain about my school, but I'm really not that parent. Like, I haven't been to the school to complain the fact that my children had one art lesson so far this year. And obviously that's not in the public news, but that is of concern to me, that their education is not rounded at all. This is 9-year-olds, you know, so I think there's a problem with how narrow, and I think parents are really obsessing about the holidays as well, and it's partly parents' fault that we're not really shouting a bit more for better balance in the curriculum, excellence, and a whole load of other stuff that it's way more worrying, actually.
In response to the very good question at the front, I've been sort of wrestling over this myself. I mean, controversial, I'll say that there's more to childhood than schooling. There's more to a child's life than being in a classroom all the time. I don't necessarily see holidays as an alternative to the classroom and an alternative form of learning. I think what used to happen is that in terms of discretionary holidays, a lot of the extra discretionary holidays, at least in our schools, would be things for like funerals or a relative getting married abroad. And I think that discretion to allow that to happen is to enable family life to function. And I think actually that's quite important. So I think going back to the old system of discretion, I didn't know that many parents who abused the system. They wouldn't even take, more than kind of five days off as it is anyway. And also what used to be the case is that if a child, I teach in the sixth form, if a child was out for a week, they would be expected to catch up, and I would go through with them what they would miss anyway, and so they would have that space to sort of catch up. So I think the discretionary holidays is, again, getting that balance between state schooling and family life, and I think the discretionary holiday just enabled family life to function. And I think that's important, and getting that balance between the two, I think, is the direction that we need to go in.
Karen just wants to say a couple of
so I completely agree about, that's what I was saying about parents needing a sort of a parent's voice to sort of do all this stuff about supporting more moves. All the call from the education profession that there is actually about a much more creative curriculum. But also, sorry, just to pick up on your question about culture, one of the things that I've heard from quite a few head teachers is that they have been trying to foster cultures of collaboration and creativity, mutual respect, anti-bullying, and all of those sorts of things in their schools. And they're finding that these rules now, they can't do that. They feel that they are being asked to be bullying and so on, and they're really finding it very difficult. So actually we've got a lot of head teachers who a lot of nudging and winking going on. This is how you write the letter asking for this is how you do that. But it is having an impact, and I think you're right that idea of setting up a culture and a community within a school is really important, and government, it seems to be, the reports that we're getting are really impacting on that.
Okay, so I'm a teacher, I'm a secondary teacher, I teach physics, and I think schools need to stop moaning about parents trying to take their children out of school during term time. Whether parents should be doing that or not, schools have a problem because schools are all the time taking children out of lessons to do things that aren't about subject knowledge. And so it's a bit rich of schools to start saying to parents, you can't take your children away because they're going to lose all this valuable education time. And yet, honestly, they're losing valuable education time all the time for a whole raft of social concerns and political concerns and all sorts of things that children are losing education for. So I think it's a bit of a disingenuous debate on the part of schools. But behind all this, I think the main problem with schooling today, which this is a complete reflection of, is proceduralism. I think schools are now dictated by process and procedure, which they kind of explain away on the basis of accountability. And I'm not saying that accountability isn't an important dynamic, but the algorithm for how you do things, whether it's behaviour management, whether it's how to revise for a topic for an exam, all different aspects, the staff progression, is all a matter of procedure. And the reason for that, I suspect, is because teachers, particularly head teachers, aren't clear in their own head what the point of education is. And if they had a clearer idea of the point of education, what are we doing this for, then you would create the culture, the ethos, the vision that parents would buy into. If you have empty procedure, no one's going to buy into that. And I suspect parents are onto the fact that a lot of empty process is going on in schools that doesn't seem to have a point. It's self-justifying. Parents are onto that, and they have no respect for it.
Firstly, I'm from a military background, so I just want to say that to the lady down at the front, I relied on those holiday days that I could see my family and my dad if he went away for a year or 8 months. So speaking on behalf of a military family, those days where schools could be flexible was so important to me and my family, and they helped us kind of go as a unit. I see both sides of the argument. I support parents who are in such a state of paranoia that they're not doing the right thing for their children. It's absurd. I pretty much have them on the phone to me crying every day from ages of 0 to 11. You know, are they doing the right thing for their children? I also have teachers who are my friends and in my family who cry by 8 o'clock in the morning because of the behaviour of the children in their class. They can't deal with it, they can't cope with it. They actually have hired a bouncer to try and get children into the class. So I wanted to ask the panel, would you say that actually we need to replace the word authority with responsibility? Who is responsible for making sure that children get a decent breakfast at 6 o'clock in the morning? Who is responsible for making sure that they're getting dressed? What about the children who are having to dress themselves on their own in the morning and they haven't been able to put a wash on the night before to get the right socks because they're actually a child carer? Who's responsible for that? And touching on what the gentleman said at the front, just here, I agree with him. I think there needs to be a very clear ethos as to who's responsible for which element of the child's life. Is a school there to educate, or is a school there to look after the children? Where is the clear ethos? I think in nurseries, for parents, we have such an amazing variety of which ethos, which aim, which style of teaching do we want to choose for our children from 0 to 3, and then boom, it goes. So I'd also like to ask the panel, do you feel that there needs to be a more uniform and a more clear distinction of what happens from the age of 3 to 5, who's responsible for which element? And do you think that perhaps this massive range of choice for parents of where they can take their children to from 0 to 3 needs to be addressed? And maybe that's perhaps why we're having so many issues now with secondary education, because there's too big of a jump from having an incredible amount of choice and flexibility at nursery to then none at school.
I kind of agree about the focus of schools and head teachers not really having a clear sense of what education is for. I'm not sure that's entirely their fault, but I think they need to be a bit braver about standing up and saying what schools are for. And bending the stick slightly the other way, I wondered what the panel think of the blurring of the lines between parenting and schooling. Because as the gentleman over there said, schools, you know, they're taking children out of lessons for all sorts of social issues, mental health issues, and a whole range of other things. And I wondered if what the panel think of parental choice and that whole minefield that started quite a long time ago, but now seems to have led to parents feeling that they have a say in the way that schools are run, and you know whether they think that's a dangerous trend or not.
I just wanted to say that a couple of years ago, our friends had moved to a different country, and about a year later, they came back to visit everyone in England, and they came to our house for a couple of nights, and it was in the summer. It was a Thursday that they came, and then we asked the school if me and my sister were allowed the Friday off so we could spend an extra day with them. Can't exactly remember what they said because I wasn't there, but they said that we couldn't have the day off, which I found was a bit unfair because we haven't seen them in a couple of years now, and we used to see them like every weekend. And because we weren't allowed to see them for that day, we got even less time to spend with them before they went to spend time with the rest of the people that they knew and their family, and then went back to where they lived then, now. So I think that children should be able to have holidays away from school depending on what the reason is. Because if there's a reason like you need to go to something, or there's something important that you can't miss, then you should be allowed to take the time off school, because otherwise you could miss something that is really important to you.
Thank you, very clearly put. End the line. Give it to that lady.
Hi, I'm a pastoral leader in a school, so I make decisions about socks and about... and it strikes me that there are two very distinct conversations going on here. One is about the change in the law that occurred around allowing head teachers discretion to make decisions. And that actually disempowered those head teachers. And that, I would say, is a bad thing. I think a lot of the other comments that I've heard, and if you'll forgive me, the story that you told as well, is also about disempowering people in schools. And I think that, speaking as a teacher, I think that there are very few other professions where such a wide group of people feel that they can tell us how to do our jobs. I think because everybody has been to school, and many of us, myself included, are parents, we feel that we should be able to have a view. I would say to you that unless you know what it's like to manage a classroom of 30 children, or even more so a school, a primary school of, however many hundred children, and unless you have been through the discussions and the thought processes that have led to that decision about how to manage uniform, how to manage behaviour in the corridors, by all means go in, ask for an explanation, but you are not in a good position to make that decision. Neither should you present yourself either to your children or to your community as a person who's in a good position to make that decision. By all means, engage in the discussion, but I do think that there needs to be a little bit of humility in the way that we interact with educational professionals. If we're expecting our children to respect their teachers, we need to treat them with respect as the professionals that we are.
I'm going to go back to the panel and then come out. Keep your anger burning inside. All points were brilliant, I thought. So, Maisie, should I...
I really like the discussion about the culture of the school. Our school had a really strong culture. I chose a school that was disciplined. I chose a school that was with a uniform. And I chose a faith school. Coming from a position of not someone at faith, from flaky, arty middle class, I really subscribed to that. But it's been very heartbreaking in our school to watch that culture be literally dismantled by a change of regime that was utterly disrespectful of what the school was like before. It said, we've got a problem with behaviour, we've got a problem in the corridors. And this is a tiny school with little corridors. This isn't a school where everyone was running up and down the corridors. There wasn't a problem to solve. And I think this blurred lines between parenting and schooling is really comes to the heart of it. I delivered my children to that school the beginning of that term, within the right uniform, present and correct, and the terms are really just ripped up. And we did not run a campaign against that rule. We did not report it to the press. The story happened, the so-called campaign happened because the rule was so absurd. It became a story. Everybody was laughing. And I just think it's just incredibly problematic that we were then told that we were trying to dictate how the school was run. And it was completely just left field. And the result is the discussion about culture, the happiness and lovingness of the school, the connection, a sense of community, the sense of what children get, the enrichment from being part of that community was just ripped up. And I'm also a massive advocate for what children learn by being on holiday. When you look at what people will, massive machinery involved in making sure that, in alleviating poverty, educational attainment, but the poverty of experience, of never having left your street, never spending the whole of your summer holidays in your front room, is very rarely addressed. And I think this is a very unhelpful about all these rules about holidays, makes that incredibly unhelpful and again shifts the emphasis away from you know, people will be very upset if children didn't have the right food, but people generally are not rattling the bars about the fact that lots of children never go on holiday, and I think it's a very, very important thing.
Neil.
Good question on the back about procedure and process in schools. I think what I'd add to that is it's not just parents who see through that; it's also teachers as well. I mean, I'm sure you appreciate that point as well, whereby a whole raft of measures designed to improve a school are more about improving the tick box approach to give the impression that the school is improving, which may actually have no direct impact on the quality of teaching and learning in a school anyway. So it's not just parents who kind of sort of see through that. The interesting question on authority and responsibility, which I want to untangle. On authority, that should definitely be in the realm of parents and teachers jointly, as a mark of adult solidarity, which I mentioned in my introduction. On responsibility, obviously as teachers we do have legal responsibility and a duty of care of children, whilst they're at school. That's where we are responsible. But I think where the problems arise is where politicians expect secondary schooling to be responsible for a lot of social problems, which clearly we're not here to actually deal with, and we're not here to sort of equip either. There is too much emphasis on teachers being social workers. There's too much emphasis on teachers overcoming problems of inequality and poverty, which we are not really equipped to. I don't necessarily support things like breakfast clubs and homework clubs, which is sort of designed to help parents, because that just opens the door for the education system for taking responsibility for things that teachers historically should not be kind of responsible for. On your point at the front, in terms of when schools have that discretion, I think you put it really well, because I think if the culture of a school is about community and community values, sometimes parents will be taking a child out for for reasons like a funeral or for a wedding, right? And as a school built around community values, there would be that compassion and that understanding that a child should be allowed to go out of school at that time. And if you think of it in relation to work, employers would allow their employees to take time off on compassionate grounds and on other grounds. I think it's odd that when it comes to schooling, that sort of ruling doesn't apply to children. Right, so I think you did put it well, the way you've articulated it, in that if we want to look at what the culture of a school is and its community values, part of that community values is have a sort of bit of compassion and humanity to what parents and families would go through at a particular time.
I think both your point and the one at the front and several things that come together in my mind, in that there is possibly a building lack of respect for the education system, not for teachers per se, but that is driven quite a bit by the noises that the teaching professions are making. The NUT's exam factory, the teaching profession, you are not happy with what is happening in schools. And so so that sort of expectation that parents should automatically consider that everything that happens in school is brilliant and go along with that, I think is it's a difficult thing that we have to balance. In terms of the sort of authority and responsibility issue, say my mother's an education welfare officer, and I think the funding has been cut terrifically to that service, and I think that's a great shame, and to educational psychology as well. I think if you have a single mother whose experience of school was very negative, if she didn't like it, if no one had diagnosed her dyslexia and she found things difficult and came away out of her school experience with a very low self-esteem, become a single mother and hasn't got a job, actually persuading her that she is being a good parent by putting her child through that same experience, I think is quite a difficult thing to do. And actually, if her child isn't there at school, then chances are it's because she's lonely. Quite often, I'm told, And actually, having an education welfare service that then goes around that goes to see the mother and understands what support services she needs to help her life get better, to help her child get into school. I think that's where we should be going. I think instead, what I'm getting stories, from a woman who is on the heart-lung transplant waiting list, whose children have been told by the medical profession that they should be going along with their mother to some of her appointments so they understand what is happening to their mother. She's being chased by an attendance service, being told that she needs to make sure her children are in school. That's the swing that we've got from something that's something that's positive and constructive to a system which seems to be really quite destructive in places. So I think that when that happens, yes, parents do lose respect. And I think we all know that gravity is there. And we've had, Greek philosophers to Newton to Einstein and continually. This is still something that we are developing models of understanding around gravity. Well, actually, educating children is equally as complex, I think. And actually, we should think that this is an ongoing process and we haven't got absolute answers on everything, and we should stop behaving as if we do.
I think it's clear from this discussion so far that there is a confusion about what schools are for. And I think that they've always had both a socialising and an educational role. So they've always had a socialising role. But I think now what I think's happened is that rhetorically the socialising role is put onto parents, but then the reality is that the schools see themselves as educating parents in how to socialise their children, and that's increasingly been the case. That's from the top down, from government down, and I think that's caused a lot of confusion. And then the result of that is that schools have lost their particular authority as educators. And once they've lost their authority, it's very difficult for them to really use discretion, because the use of discretion requires sometimes saying no. So sometimes you can say yes, I think that's right, that's what discretion is, and sometimes you say no. And I think what I'm kind of getting from this discussion also is that you can't say no anymore almost. So you have to then just have rules. So that's the case of the socks and the school holidays. It's the same issue that's taken place. When you've lost your particular authority, your specific authority, that means people are going to listen to you and take on board what you say. You can't say yes and you can't say no.
So it kind of follows that point, really, because the big question for me is why schools have become so, seem to find it so hard to impose the rules in their own environment. And that's partly the problem, that what you've had with, actually your story, Maisie, and the Hearts Down Academy thing in Kent, where all the kids were sent home, is that this completely over-the-top sort of scenario on the one hand. And then on the other hand, basic sort of things that have always gone in schools, like enforcing uniform, don't really seem to happen. There'll be these kind of very strict rules, but then schools find it very difficult to sort of actually just enforce it. I mean, for you and also the other children in the audience, I'd really recommend reading The Diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4, I think it was it? 12? Yeah. Anyway, because there's a sock story in there, right? I mean, he goes to school wearing red socks. I can't remember exactly what happens, but it's been a feature of everybody's life through decades. And I mean, it seems to me that part of the whole process of going to school is to recognise that in life there are rules which are stupid, but you have to conform to them or get punished. I mean, that's that's the thing. And as a school, I don't have any problem schools punishing children for flouting uniform policy. That seems to me to be sensible. Sending them home seems weird, and kind of trying to encroach all the time in terms of going directly to the parents, or expecting the parents to discipline the children on behalf of the school for rules they've broken in the school, seems to be something different entirely. So that's where I think a lot of these tensions lie. It's not. I actually agree with you completely, Neil, in terms of the boundary thing being very, very important thing to maintain, and everybody's suffering from these blurred boundaries in the way people have suggested. But if you need rules in schools and you need to impose them, but you need to impose them as a school rather than kind of trying to get everyone else to do that job for you.
Hello, I'm a primary school teacher. I teach reception in year one, so I do quite a lot of socialising, and I do think that when they come to secondary school, by the time they get to secondary school, the socialisation, to a certain extent, starts to happen quite independently of the school. It is a graduating process. But in response to the question of who's responsible for the children, we all are responsible for the children, and this is where the parental teacher solidarity is quite important. I mean, I know, particularly in my class, because it's the first year at school, that the parents are handing their heart over to me every day, and I have to be very aware of that, in the way that I enforce the rules. I mean, once the door's shut, then I'm a very strict teacher and, push those children as far as I can academically. Don't always take up their issues if I think they're being a bit silly about it. Sometimes I do take their issues up if I think they're important. They behave very differently at school to the way that they behave at home. And I do think that there is a gap between, and there should be, between home and school. I love it when the parents say to me, you won't tell me what happened at school. And I think, good. It's their private life. They're going to school. It's a different world. It's not the world of home. I don't expect them, although I do hear quite a lot of stories about what goes on at home. And often they tell me when they've been to the pub with their parents and things like that. And lots of stories parents wouldn't want me to know, but I do. But at the same time, I don't expect to interrogate them on what happens at home. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because as a parent, you want to envelop your children and know everything that's going on. But unfortunately, they are separate to you. The only other thing I wanted to say is, this elevation of experience of holidays and all of that kind of thing. I totally agree that there should be discretion. And I totally agree that, going to Tanzania or wherever is an amazing experience for a child to have. But you can have an experience in a book that takes you out of your life as well. And I don't think we should, make it a big thing about holidays being the be-all and end-all of children's experience. Although I do think, putting children through lots of different experiences is good. My final point is, I think that there should be a discretion about teachers having holidays during term time, because I always have to go on holiday with other people's children.
I wanted to pick up on something the lady at the audience was saying earlier, complaining about people telling teachers how to do their jobs. Now, I've got a lot of sympathy with that. I think basically teachers, we need to trust them more, and parents should stay out of the classroom generally. But I do have a reservation. When this comes up, people often talk about, you wouldn't tell surgeons how to do their job. Well, quite right, but you might do if they came to you and said, well, we're going to treat your cancer with homeopathic medicine. And I think we've got something slightly similar here going on, where the principles that underlie education, what it's for, have changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years without the public really being brought along and up for it. And I don't know if other people who are parents share this experience. My son's been to 3 schools. Pretty much every meeting we've had with the school has been a baffling experience, where they talk to you in a language which makes no sense, and they're talking about things which have no interest to you. You want to go and find out about what your kid is up to, how they're doing, what the school's going to do, etc., etc. And they talk to you in the language of therapy. Went to one a couple of weeks ago, billed as a transition meeting. Everyone just thought it was a parents' evening. You couldn't call it a parents' evening, and we just had a load of therapeutic nonsense thrown at us. And I think parents really can sense that something's gone wrong, and I think we've got to recognise that.
Just a few points on this. I'd preface this remark by saying schools are their own worst enemies. Many of the things that schools do are so daft, they do invite contempt, and rightly so. But I think there's this slightly white middle class sneering condescension against authority, which I find very troubling as well. And it's okay for the Hugos and the Jocastas of this world, because they will go to Tuscany and they will have a delightful time. And if things get too tough in the state school, you will home educate or you will go private. But for a lot of the kids I teach, it's very different. the kids that I teach who've been excluded from 3 schools for hitting their teacher around the head with a meter stick, kids that I teach whose parents are heroin addicts, the kids I teach who come from Irish traveller families, or those who have not a single positive male role model in their life, children from very different backgrounds, the idea that we can just kind of sneer and laugh at the petty rules and regulations at schools. We do actually need to work in partnership. And for many of the children in our country, and actually in lots of fairly ordinary schools, they do need that consistency, that discipline, that behaviour management, if they're going to possibly learn anything.
I think if you don't want your authority to be undermined, you don't want rules to be undermined, pick the rules that matter so that people are not going after the ones that clearly do not matter. On the choice of education, I've got a 15-year-old. She's doing her GCSEs this coming year. And what was really annoying to me as a parent was that because my daughter is quite bright, when it came to her picking her options, which subject she wanted to actually take, the government pretty much had already decided which options my daughter couldn't take because she was too clever to take those options. So not only were they taking no regard of what her particular interests or passions might have been, they were also making an assumption about my or her willingness or desire, or ability even, to go on to further education and or university. I wonder what panel think about that.
Just wanted to say this. Sometimes kids and teenagers do stupid things outside school. Usually they get told off by their parents, but sometimes people see the stupid things the pupil has done, and even when it has a completely separate situation from school, they tell the school and the student gets punished by the school. I just want to ask, does this seem fair?
Hi, I live in Hackney. I don't know if we're allowed to say where we're from. And Hackney is the place where the sort of very, very strict boot camp academy model was invented. And it's been deemed to be, certainly in Hackney, very, very successful. I've got 3 children and they haven't gone to that kind of school. But I've got a lot of sympathy with what my friend over here says about the different sort of rule regimes and who we're actually talking about and who we're caring for. When I went to visit the 2 very, very strict secondary school academies in our area when choosing secondary schools, what they said to us was, we were really failing the kids in our area, really badly failing the kids. Not the rich kids, because they're being educated partly in school and partly out of school, but we were really failing the poorer kids. And this model, this kind of hyper-strict boot camp, you have to, detention for the wrong-sized ruler, internal exclusion for putting your arm around your best friend model, is a response to that. Now, I have very, very mixed feelings about that, but I'd be interested to know what the panel thinks about how we do provide a kind of overarching education for all the children in our area in a very, very mixed community that takes into account the fact that not in every family will that support be there, not because the parents couldn't give a monkeys, but because they actually can't provide it. And that partly is in response to the chap who said he doesn't agree with breakfast clubs and homework clubs. The pastoral care, the very important side, I think, of that sort of model is that the school is taking responsibility for the children's education. It's taking 100% responsibility for the children's education because it's saying that even if you haven't got that support at home, we will provide a proper education for your children. For me, it might not work and there might be real problems with it, but for me, that's a very important element of that model.
To come back to the point of how eagerly people tell teachers to do their job, as a head of maths, nothing makes me roll my eyes as much as the 30 emails that I get at the beginning of every year about the parents that have decided that their children are in the wrong set and I must deal with that. However, I can't help but think that teachers do bring this upon themselves, and I am amazed at the gusto with which teachers interfere in family life. And just 2 examples in the last year. We had a young lady who mentioned in passing that she was going to visit her family in Africa, and the family were brought in for a meeting because the area where they were going to visit had a very high prevalence of FGM. And without question, the school took the authority of calling that family into question with what their intentions were and what they were going to do. And another example is just a young man who mentioned to his teacher in passing that his mum had cancelled his birthday party because he'd stolen money from her wallet. And the teacher took it upon themselves to call the mum and say, well, you know, we know why he did this. He wanted to go on a trip. He needed the money. Any chance you could change your mind? And you can't really have that situation where you're so willing to tell parents how to parent, yet complain when you're being told how to teach.
Karen, start from you.
Very briefly on the baffling language thing, the one thing that made me laugh a lot was when I was talking to a PE teacher who said that told me how my child was doing against targets, and I said, how do you come by the targets for PE? She said, oh, it depends on how they do in their Year 6 English SATs. And failed to understand why that made me laugh. I think there's this issue about the children who really need the support of the education system the most. I think that's one of the most irritating things about this attendance regulation, is that I know the intention was to help those children the most. You know, the persistent absentees, the children for whom life chances are really seriously being impacted because of the lack of education. And I think that a lot of what the government is doing is actually distracting from that. So again, you know, the reduction in funding for EWOs and for the sort of support stuff. But I think that initiatives like pupil premium and giving schools a little bit more flexibility about how they do that, that's where, if you know, I was Queen of the Universe, that's where I'd be putting my money. And looking at initiatives like they have in Canada, the Pathways one, where they take a whole community approach to getting the kids into school, and for the whole community, from local businesses to families, whatever, to start getting involved in that. And that's where I think that we should be putting our emphasis. And I think we should also be putting a great deal of emphasis on teacher training and really ploughing in resources into that, because you know, Sutton Trust saying, you look, if you've got a good teacher, you get 1.5 years worth of attainment during a year. If you've got a poor teacher, you get half a year's worth. So the difference between the teacher is a difference of 1 year's worth of attainment. So let's give the teachers the resources and the training and the CPD to actually really be doing the job. And then, for God's sake, let's leave them to it. And at that point, I think that's when parents will happily step back and go, yeah, no, you know what you're doing, get on with it.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on the comment that a woman made at the front here about the main problem is that schools do not enforce some rules at school itself, and there is far too much of a culture of firing the parents and let home to parents over kind of anything. And I think that is problematic for all sorts of reasons, and I think it's often not commented on that how a child behaves at home can be completely different how they behave in a school environment for all kinds of sort of different reasons. And therefore it's up to the job of the teacher to actually sort out the behaviour in the classroom, not how they behave at home, or the expectation that a parent having a quiet word with their son and daughter will improve their behaviour, because it's not really about that, it's about the dynamics of the classroom. And secondly, I think the other problem with, you know, running to the parents is that you're not actually instilling a sense of personal responsibility to that child, right, or to that sort of to that teenager in the sixth form. You're not kind of giving them a sense of personal responsibility if you're constantly, you know, sort of run back to the parents. I think it's a really sort of useful point that school rules, you know, should be enforced, and they should not be required for parents to sort of provide that backup. And mainly because it actually doesn't work, and I think it's often counterproductive. There's been a number of comments about this trope of the sharp-elbowed middle-class parent. There's a degree of truth in that, but I think it's only a recent phenomenon, and I think it's only a recent phenomenon because of changes with the way that governments have hyped up so many panics around childcare. And I think one of the ways that you advertise that you're a good parent is being, you know, extremely concerned about your child's well-being. So I think it is something that's a recent development, and I think it's worthwhile kind of looking at why that's taken place. I actually agree with the comment that sometimes, you know, schools are their own worst enemies with this, and I think they end up being their own worst enemies when they try to farm out their authority to parents on issues that relate specifically to the classroom.
Well, I mean, what's really surprised me in this was if this was a bid for authority, how extraordinarily unauthoritatively the school actually have acted. Because the end of the story is that the head teacher's contract was not renewed at the end of last year. Parents were then lied to about the reason for that, but the governors basically shipped her out. So having tried to impose this rule, they then, there was this is what I would say, it is the more authoritative schools try to be, it feels like a crisis of authority, because of how defensively the school actually behaved about it. So they wouldn't meet parents. They did, the accusation of being a sharp-elbowed middle-class parent is massive impediment to have me in any conversation with my school, because I know that I fit that box, and that actually prevents me having, it's stifling. But their lack of honesty and authority, how easily threatened the school would feel by parents disagreeing. You know, it's like we weren't even given the space to disagree. And I also say that there's a long British healthy tradition of cocking a snook at authority. And that is great. You know, that's Monty Python, that's putting up two fingers to the teacher, left, right and centre. It's, hey teacher, leave those kids alone. And I think schools shouldn't be so defensive about that, because it's funny and it's stupid, and that's how we are in this country. And it's also a great strength that we don't do everything that we're told, and we are sometimes a bit rude to policemen and things like that. It's part of who makes it, what makes it what we are. It's a very strong tradition. Our school was already succeeding. It was not that school. It wasn't a massive disciplinary problem to solve. Yeah, I think if the authority of a school, they're going to act so threatened, then that's not real authority. It's something very odd instead.
Now, any very last quick...
Sorry, Jane, I realised we didn't answer the question about is it right that pupils should be punished in school for stuff that happened outside of school. This is a very long time ago this happened, so it's not something I'm condoning. We had a friend at school when I was boarding who was he was seen by a teacher in a pub. And he was a day boy, and we were boarders, and he got punished for doing that. And we were absolutely outraged. So I'm with you on that. I don't think at all that it's right for schools to punish kids for what they do outside.
We all need to
Thank you.
break.
I'm a head teacher, so the last hour and a half has felt like a character assassination on me and all of my colleagues. I don't recognise it. You're taking one example of quite possibly a rubbish head teacher and using that, which doesn't seem a very sensible thing to do. What I wanted to say was that you reap what you sow. The last 15 years in particular in this country have handed over parental responsibility to schools in a way that I've never known before. The behaviour in schools in this country at the moment is as bad as I've ever known it. If you travel around the world and look at behaviour in schools around the world, it is nothing like this. Immigrant children arriving in this country and going into classrooms are appalled at the way children here behave. And schools have rules for a reason, and you have lots of schools that you can send your children to. If you don't like that school that you're sending them to, send them somewhere else. But when you do send them to a school, you're signing up to agree with a set of rules, and those rules are there for a reason. There is nothing helpful or right on about applauding a boy who breaks rules. That does not help him. Soon he'll enter the world of work and have to obey lots of rules he thinks are stupid. We have rules for a reason. They're there to make sure we can educate children in a sensible way. Some of the rules are stupid. Fine, the head teacher was an idiot. Send your child elsewhere. But let's not put this on every school in the country. We're not like that.
I was a school teacher for 32 years and managed to tunnel out in 2009. I came from a very difficult school in South London, which had an inspection twice a year, probably, and it worked okay. Secondly, I'm always amazed that when teachers are on strike or when a child is taken out of school for a week or so, it's going to actually fundamentally bring their education crumbling down. It always surprises me. And thirdly, I'm often wondering whether the relationship between school, child and parent could be mediated a little bit more by the language that's actually used in terms of communication. For instance, the gentleman there says, enforce the rules. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear somebody telling me a rule, I immediately think, let's fight against that. That's just the way I am, and that's the way a lot of young people are. I've worked with very difficult children in the past, and I know you're absolutely right. They like to conform, or they like to be told exactly what to do. It's structure that helps them. But I'm just wondering whether the communication that comes between schools and parents in letters, in communication, this gentleman talked about, I think he talked about therapy speak. I wonder whether the language that we use it ought to be more, and maybe as a footnote, we get rid of the word rule.
Right, thank you very much. Speakers 1 minute, and we'll go Maisie, Karen, Neil.
I think the point of language is very useful, and I think parents get that they're being talked to in a very, very odd way. And this particular head, I don't agree she's just a rubbish head. She's the head of 2 schools. She's called a super head, and she's gone on to be the head of 2 more schools. And we get that there's something just very weird in this kind of, she's lauded in, and we're told that she's a fantastic, there's a lot of sell around that person. So I think we get that there's something really strange going on, and I think that everyone's it makes one very uneasy, and it's not very helpful.
Thank you. Karen.
As to character assassination, I'm sorry, there are a huge number of head teachers who have used their discretion with absolute, in an exemplary fashion, and who are doing all sorts of amazing things. I just wish that there were more of them, because the tide has come out on this and really displayed some head teachers who really ought not to be anywhere near a child, but very few of them. As to communication, yes, absolutely. I think that parents should not be receiving letters which tell them that they will be fined and taken to court for exercising their own discretion. I think if the school actually has a conversation and a mature discussion, then things would be a lot better, rather than that sort of, threatening people with the law because they've taken their child out because they're worried about their asthma attacks.
Thank you.
Okay, just on the question of rules, it's very straightforward, isn't it? Rules exist to ensure that learning, takes place in the classroom, and that the passing of knowledge can happen in a classroom smoothly. So I think we'd all be in agreement with that. The other thing with rules as well, obviously they go alongside values, and in a school environment, values teach children the importance of a public space. It teaches them the importance that there is something bigger than their own kind of narrow interests. So I think rules and values go hand in hand in terms of taking a child out of their own kind of sort of narrow preoccupations. And I think the problem that we have today is that in the adult world, there is a backlash against the idea of any formality. In the outside world, and there's a backlash against the idea of imposition of sort of basic rules in the outside world. And I think that's what happens, whereby we have a climate where formality has collapsed, and I think parents bring in that backlash against formality into schools.
Right, well, brilliant. Thank you, panel. Thank you very much.